Hello again. In our studies of the book, What is Man? Adam, Alien, or Ape? We've reached chapter 11, and we are now moving into the part of the book which deals with man's relationship with the Bible, or man as seen by the Bible. I'm conscious of the fact that some who are subscribing to the YouTube version of my readings from the book have joined since this particular series began. So I want just to remind them, and myself indeed, what the book is all about. The book consists of 3 parts. The first part relates to man's place in the cosmos, man's relationship with the universe. What is man's place in the cosmos as a whole? The second portion of the book relates to man's place in the biosphere, the world of living things. Did man evolve from a simpler life form? Or was he, as the Bible claims, created de novo by God? And now we move into the third portion of the book, where we are considering what the Bible has to say about the nature and purpose and destiny of humanity. And that, of course, is of great importance to all of us. Whether we believe the Bible or not, we do need to consider these questions. What is man? Now, chapter 11, which we now begin, is entitled Adam and the Apple. It's now time to consider what really happened in the Garden of Eden. Did Adam and Eve actually exist? And were they truly the progenitors of the whole human race, as the Bible claims? We consider and reject the idea that there must have been thousands of Adams, and that the biblical couple stand proxy for an evolving population of apes. Was Eve really tempted by a talking snake? Was there actually a tree bearing forbidden fruit, which Adam and Eve ate in defiance of God? Did their defiance bring about estrangement from God and also cause human mortality? And what, if anything, is the significance of the tree of life? It is popular today, even for Christians, to dismiss the opening chapters of the book of Genesis as myths, perhaps offering spiritual lessons, but having no historical reality. But the Bible, in both Old and New Testaments, is adamant in affirming the historicity of the narratives of the creation and fall of man. We shall see how it also spells out the consequences of Adam's rebellion against his Creator, how those consequences affect us today, and how they offer a complete and compelling explanation of man himself, the human condition, and why Jesus Christ had to come into the world, quotes, to seek and to save that which was lost. The chapter is entitled Adam and the Apple and has a subtitle, The Historicity and Fall of Adam and Eve. And there's a chapter heading quotation from Professor John Collins. Through most of the Church's history, Christians, like the Jews from whom they sprang, have believed that the biblical Adam and Eve were actual persons from whom all other human beings are descended, and whose disobedience to God brought sin into human experience. And then the chapter begins. We've considered Aristotle and the snowball, but now we must go back in time to address Adam and the apple, actually an unspecified tree fruit. If, as it claims, the Bible is God's message to mankind, we shouldn't be surprised that man occupies a central role in the biblical worldview. His creation and fall from favor is described in the Bible's opening chapters. But did the human race really begin with Adam? And if it did, how many Adams actually existed? To make it easier, I'll put it as a multiple choice question. How many Adams were there? Answer 1, none. Answer 2, 1. Answer 3, 2. And answer 4, 10,000. Which is the right answer? It depends on who you ask. Skeptics choose the first answer, claiming that Adam is a myth and no such first man ever existed. The Bible goes for answer 2. And I quote from the scriptures, "The Lord God formed man of the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living being." This must refer to a single person, since we read later that the Lord God said it is not good that man should be alone. On the other hand, answer 3 could be equally correct, because we are told that God created man, Hebrew Adam, in his own image. In the image of God he created him. Male and female he created them. So the first woman, Eve, must also be counted as an Adam. But perhaps the Bible's full answer is 4th. And I base that statement on the Apostle Paul's declaration that Adam is a type, that is to say, a picture or a pattern of him who was to come, that is Christ. And again, in another place, the first Adam became a living being. The last Adam, that is Christ, became a life-giving spirit. Close quotes. The first Adam will concern us in this chapter, and the next Adam, after that, we shall see was Christ, and we shall see why he is called the last Adam, or second Adam, and what that means to us on a personal level. Both skeptics and theistic evolutionists argue that the possibility of the human race arising from just a single couple is ruled out by population genetics, They claim that to explain the genetic variability among humans today, Homo sapiens must have emerged from a population of ape-like ancestors, a population that could be as large as 10,000 individuals. However, the arguments and calculations that lead to this conclusion involve significant assumptions. So let's consider some of them. Thousands of Adams, that's the next subheading, and it has a question mark at the end. Thousands of Adams, question mark. Let me start by making one thing clear. It is theoretically possible for two parents to populate the Earth in relatively few generations. Suppose a woman bears 4 children before the age of 40. Assuming that 2 of the children are female and reproduce according to the same pattern as their mother, the next second generation will contain 4 fertile women who will bear 8 females. If the same pattern is repeated consistently in future generations, the number of child bearers in generation n, where n is any number, will be 2 to the power n. The world's population in 2017 was 7.5 billion, and this figure would be, according to this calculation, reached in 33 generations. Counting each generation as 40 years, this would take only 1,320 years to take place. Of course, this calculation is ridiculously simplistic. We know that population sizes can shrink as well as rise. The calculation assumes an unrealistic, constant reproductive pattern and ignores infant mortality, barrenness, maternal death, and catastrophic events, such as wars, ice ages, and the Great Flood recorded in the book of Genesis, and recorded also, incidentally, in many other worldwide traditions. But my only purpose here is to point out that given favorable conditions, you don't need all that many generations to produce huge populations. However, the 10,000 Adams scenario isn't based just on numbers, but on genetic diversity. The argument begins with the fact that a single individual has only 2 versions of a given gene in his or her DNA. These different versions are called alleles of the gene. For example, your eye color is largely determined by whether you have the allele for blue or brown eyes, or one of each allele, because brown dominates blue. Both of your alleles need to be blue to give you blue eyes. Other alleles are also involved to a lesser extent. A single couple can therefore have no more than 4 different alleles of a given gene between them. If the 4 alleles of any gene possessed by Adam and Eve were passed on unchanged to all their descendants, we ought to find that only the same 4 versions of the gene are present in the entire human population. Instead, depending on the type of gene involved, there are, or there may be, hundreds of different alleles of a given gene in the modern human. And although some of this variation could be explained by known genetic mechanisms, these would be hopelessly insufficient to account for most of the variation. Thus the whole human race can't have descended from a single couple, can it? ? But notice the assumption made in reaching this conclusion. Firstly, among all the mutations that evolutionists say will occur in particular genes over the course of time, it is assumed that very few have led to the creation of a new allele. That is, almost every mutation that genes have undergone has been either harmful, leading to the elimination of the altered gene, or neutral, producing no functional change in the gene. This leads to the conclusion that normal evolutionary processes are simply too slow to explain the genetic diversity of a race descended from a single pair. Yet macroevolution in its entirety rests on the opposite assumption, namely that beneficial mutations happen all the time, get fixed in a population by natural selection, and from the time scale envisaged for the rise of man, lead not just to new alleles, but to whole new genes, genomes, and species. You really can't have it both ways. A second assumption is that Adam and Eve had genomes just like ours today, whereas they could have been created with a vastly richer store of DNA than that of modern man, and in which the potential for many different alleles lay dormant. The only reason a given couple have 4 alleles of any gene between them is that they each receive 2 alleles from their parents, one from dad and one from mum. But if Adam and Eve were specially created beings, they had no parent, and we have no idea how many alleles of a given gene they possessed. In other words, the starting point of 4 alleles is based on the assumption that Adam and Eve evolved from some earlier creature, and the argument comes close to circular reasoning. If the progenitors of humanity were specially created with an enriched genome, this would also explain why intermarriage between their children didn't cause genetic problems through interbreeding. A third assumption is that no new alleles could have been produced rapidly by the epigenetic and other non-Darwinian processes that we discussed in an earlier chapter. None of these assumptions can be considered sound. The geneticist Anne Gauger and co-authors have given a detailed technical refutation of the 10,000 calculation based only on known genetic processes. These calculations demonstrate how the whole human race could well have developed from a single pair. She concludes, quotes, "But one thing is clear right now. Adam and Eve have not been disproven by science, and those who claim otherwise are misrepresenting the scientific evidence." Her work is further supported by a sophisticated population model proposed by Fazal Rana, which, if correct, predicts that Adam was a real person who lived somewhere between 50,000 and 70,000 years ago. Yet further arguments leading to the same conclusion are advanced by John Bloom in his paper on human origins, and Richard Bugg's in Nature, Ecology and Evolution, a book that provides an excellent summary of these arguments in favor of a single couple being progenitors of the human race. Also, evidence is provided in an essay by philosopher Lydia McGrew, who concludes, quotation here now, "What we are being told is that there is something analogous to a video of the past showing via highly reliable methods what appears to be an uninterrupted history of the natural evolution of mankind from non-human ancestors. A history of mankind that could not have begun with two individuals." This is not true. Given the scriptural evidence for the existence of an historical Adam and Eve, the first and only parents of mankind, Christians are fully justified in asking for strong counter-evidences. It does not seem to have been forthcoming, despite all the fanfare. Close quotes. Taken together, these considerations mean that it is perfectly rational and scientifically justified to believe that all humanity did indeed descend from one original created pair, just as the Bible asserts. There we will leave this particular podcast, and the next subheading that we shall deal with in the following podcast in this series is entitled The Genesis Genre, talking about the genre of literature, the kind of literature that the book of Genesis exhibits and uses.